Hello, everyone. I'm Nick Hart, President and CEO of the Data Foundation. Thank you for joining today's virtual event. Today, I am excited to share with all of you that the Data Foundation is launching our Evidence Act Hub, a comprehensive digital repository of resources that are related to evaluation, data, and evidence. You can find it at evidenceact.org, but it's actually way more than that. It is an approach to shift how the Data Foundation is focusing on our mission and some service delivery. 2025 was a year. Maybe can't overstate that or understate that really in the work that we do related to data and evidence. It was a year of transition. Many people might think it was also a year of defense. Some people approach it as a year of offense. And today, in our work related to the Evidence Act and open data and evaluation, it's also a moment where we get to think about how we work towards construction. So, what do I mean by that? Over the course of 2025, the Data Foundation published what we called evidence capacity pulse reports. We launched a program called SafeTrack that was all about our ability to monitor what was changing in real time across the federal data ecosystem. Behind the scenes, we were focused on advocacy of protecting and developing critical infrastructure that for our economy and society is valued at billions of dollars. We launched projects like My Data Story and People's Data 100, which are specifically designed to help us better tell the story of why federal government data are valuable to our society and why this data infrastructure matters to all of us. We consistently heard a message from across our community, whether it was industry, governments, or nonprofits. We need better resources right now. We need things that we can actually use to support this infrastructure, and we need more than just recommendations. And that's exactly what our Evidence Act Hub is all about. It is a resource for our entire community to use. So let me zoom out for just a minute. The Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act, or Evidence Act as we call it, was signed into law back in January of 2019. We are almost at the 7-year anniversary of this law being enacted and being implemented across the federal government. There are loads of implementation challenges that we've experienced in implementing that law, and it goes back even before that law existed. Some of the baseline work, the groundwork that started in the Bush administration or the Obama administration that was foundational around open data strategies and data sharing. President Trump signed that law back in 2019, created the federal data strategy. President Biden worked on implementation strategies, created the first learning agendas across that administration and the executive branch. Now the Trump administration and its current configuration, agencies are publishing open data plans and open data strategies, now AI strategies. There's a lot in this ecosystem that's helping us plan strategies to better use data. Now, as the presidents change and as the executive branches change, each transition moment has brought some level of disruption in our ability to understand what's happening across this data ecosystem. Map on top of that congressional oversight and transparency mechanisms that challenge our ability to understand and engage with what's happening. Maybe limited hearings, scattered attention, no clear mechanism for providing that oversight. Our estimate is that at the current pace, implementation would take 60 to 70 years in the future to have full implementation of the Evidence Act. And frankly, we can't wait until the year 2100 to experience full implementation of the Evidence Act. We need it right now. So we're not waiting in our work at the Data Foundation. We've spent years advocating for government to build better systems. We've worked on the Evidence Act, the Financial Data Transparency Act, the Data Act, the GREAT Act, the National Secure Data Service, and implementation of many of these laws has taken far too long. There are major gaps in what's needed, and what exists needs to keep growing. So as we look at this year and the years ahead, we're thinking about transitions and how we can better support the work across transitions, including the resources that we all need to ensure are available consistently so we can understand what's needed, necessary, and available in agencies going forward. This year exposed some risks. Materials that are scattered across agencies, including dozens, in some cases hundreds of agency websites, are difficult to find. There's no single place to access these resources, even though there are some consolidated resources that exist for certain assets. It's difficult for Congress to track compliance with these laws. Each transition in the past has brought risk of lost materials, and this year was no exception to that. This created some immediate and practical problems for researchers in the field who actually intend to be able to use these assets, but definitely for congressional staff and the federal officials that we hope and aspire will actually be using the resources. So what's our community need for all of this work? Well, working alongside our peer organizations, we did develop some strategic recommendations. We have a clear need for better operational resources, not just the recommendations to do more. And we need better tools to enable that congressional oversight for laws like the Evidence Act. So here's our response. We built one ourselves. And that's what the Evidence Act Hub is. And frankly, this is going to prove that some of this is possible at a low cost. We had a great team that really pulled together these resources, and I want to acknowledge them right here, right now, because this is an incredible effort from a lot of very dedicated fellows and staff members on our side that really culled through a lot of resources to begin addressing these challenges. And hopefully this will help us support oversight of the Evidence Act in the years to come, but also enable better implementation and more rapid implementation ahead. So here's what the Hub is. Things that are in the Hub that you can find right now at evidenceact.org. Learning agendas, capacity assessments, evaluation plans, evaluation policies, open data plans. All of those things are required by the Evidence Act. Now, not every agency has fully complied with requirements to develop and publish those documents. But for the agencies that have, at any point in the last 7 years, our team has collated those materials and made them available for you. The context is also important here. So we're making available in a single location the text of relevant legislation, OMB guidance documents that are sometimes a little cryptic and hard to find, statistical policy directives that enable us to understand what's relevant for the federal statistical system, and a framework to understand not just what the agencies are publishing, but why and how they're actually using it. So hopefully for practitioners that are out there, you can also realize the information is sorted and enabled for your use by agency and or document type. So people access information in lots of different ways. We want you to be able to use it in the way that's most meaningful to you. You can compare across agencies, across time and history, and also see what those changes look like. Now, one really important thing now that we're in officially an age of artificial intelligence, we know a lot is going to change in coming years, and we've tried our best to make everything here machine readable for formats that can be used in AI applications. There's a lot to come in the future as we develop out more applications and tools for you in evidenceact.org. However, all of these documents can be downloadable and ingested into AI platforms because we've made it open access for your use. So we've designed this based on what practitioners have told us that they need and want. And I want to give also an acknowledgement to the incredible work at an organization called the Internet Archive, which curates and organizes information already on lots of these resources because we use them to also find some archival material that we're making available for your use. Lots of past government initiatives like evaluation.gov were built outside government with systems of continuity. So there's a lot of information here that also relates to that website. So this exists, it's available today, and we are highlighting that it is distinctly a resource outside of government, but it is about government knowledge and resources. Now, one reason that I want to reframe that is important about implementation challenges for the Evidence Act is that there's no easy way for congressional staff to track agency compliance with the law. We think the Hub will make that something that's more feasible going forward. So if there's an agency staff member listening to this, or someone who you work with as a member of our community who says, is there a learning agenda, or what questions are agencies prioritizing, or what is the open data plan for the Department of Energy? Our resources are now making that an easily findable document that you don't have to go scour the agency websites for. But you can also begin comparing across the agencies. And again, I'll just stress that this is all open access. So I'm particularly optimistic as we go forward here, not to say that this solves all of our problems for implementing the Evidence Act or open data issues going forward, But 5 years ago, this would have been a huge investment because we hadn't developed a lot of these planning documents. Today, we're beginning to see things operate a bit more sustainably in this space, and hopefully this will be a good resource. There are, of course, a lot of capacity challenges happening in government, and we are trying our best to provide some resources to support agencies going forward. I do want to stress that this is not intended to be a statement about politics. It is not a statement about Republicans or Democrats. We do view that this is a relevant resource regardless of where folks sit on the political spectrum. We know Republicans and Democrats alike value efficiency, they value effectiveness, they value sustainability of resources, and they value the ability to analyze across groups in our society. And the resources that are here and the things that are enabled by the Evidence Act definitely support all of those things. There has been a lot of disruption in 2025 in our government and in our society. The Evidence Act enables our ability to study many of the things that are happening in our government, creates an evaluation infrastructure, a data infrastructure, and data governance capabilities that can help our government and our society answer many of the big wicked questions that policymakers and decision makers are facing. So if we talk about what success looks like going forward for implementing the Evidence Act, here are some things that I would like to see us think about and encourage, and then we'll turn to the panel in just a minute. We do need our learning agendas and those big questions that decision makers want to have answered for our government framed appropriately. We need to know what our research priorities are in government. Many of those questions may look different today in 2025 and going into 2026 than they did several years ago. Having those aligned to strategic plans going into next year should be a priority for implementation in our government agencies. Enabling success of the leaders of our agencies that are supporting evidence building priorities. That includes chief data officers, evaluation officers, and our statistical officials, ensures that there's someone paying attention across key functions in government today. And ensuring that they have the resources and the capacity to do that work is absolutely essential. And ensuring that congressional oversight is effective and consistent is an absolute certainty that we need. If you're a practitioner, we know that federal officials finding peer examples easily is going to be something that will be increasingly necessary. That means having coordination functions across councils and communities of practice and collaborations that are effective will most certainly be necessary as well. Here at the Data Foundation, this is something that we support, we want to enable, and next year and this year, we will continue having resources like this, like the Evidence Act Hub, increasingly available. We encourage you to reach out to us if you have suggestions, and we have an amazing team, including a growing cohort of fellows and experts who support this work. Now, we're not just talking about imagining this future, we're aspiring to help build it. So we have a lot of work to do ahead in building this resilient future, and we hope that you'll join us in doing this. With that said, I now want to turn to our broader discussion with a panel of experts to really lean in on some of these themes and dig into why this will be so useful, the Evidence Act Hub, not just today, but in the years ahead. So you're going to hear from Sarah Stefanik, who's going to moderate this discussion. Sarah is our director of our Center for Evidence Capacity and really led the work developing the Evidence Act Hub and has a host of knowledge in understanding practitioner needs. Susan Jenkins is a former HHS Chief Evaluation Officer, and I'd say one of the greatest champions I know of the Evidence Act out there, and a senior fellow here at the Data Foundation. And Daniel Schumann, who I would just generally characterize as one of the greatest transparency advocates that we have in American society of advocating for good transparency and good government here in the United States, and has been tracking transparency challenges and really opportunities that span years and decades, has been supporting really strong congressional oversight, and also one of our senior fellows here at the Data Foundation. So Sarah, Susan, and Daniel, if you want to join me here on our virtual stage, I will turn the mic over to Sarah to navigate us through our discussion. Sarah, to you.
Thanks, Nick. And Susan and Daniel, thanks for joining us today. As Nick said, we're really excited. It's a fantastic day for the launch, but I'm going to turn it over to Susan and Daniel really quick. Nick gave an organizational background and how this developed and things like that, but I want Susan and Daniel to speak to their backgrounds, what they've worked in, and also why this is important to them, but also why they believe it's important to the broader community. So, Susan, I'll start with you.
Sure, thank you, and I'm happy to be here. I really do love the Evidence Act and evidence building. That is very true. And as the Chief Evaluation Officer for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, I did work with my team to develop the required reporting under the Title I of the Evidence Act. So that's the evaluation plans, the learning agendas, the capacity assessments, the evaluation policy. And I stood on the shoulders of folks that had worked on it previously. And so before that, also, I was the director of the Office of Evaluation, Performance and Evaluation for one of the divisions of HHS, and also supporting the larger HHS activities and developing learning agendas and capacity assessments for the division that I was in. And I would say that those requirements, those deliverables are more than just requirements. We need to really advertise, federal government needs to advertise what are the priorities for research. It may seem obvious, but the government can't do everything for everyone at all times. And there are other very credible, excellent, focused researchers working on many of the same issues as the federal agencies. And so as the federal government is able to really transmit what they're focused on, these researchers can partner, can offer what they're working on. They may be academic researchers, they may be in think tanks, they may be local service providers who know something about a particular topic. And so having that communication, and that's really the purpose of those deliverables, is really important. And I'll just give a very quick example. When I was with the Administration for Community Living, part of HHS, we were focused on the epidemic of loneliness, if folks remember that, as it was put out by the Surgeon General at that time. And we had a lot of programs related to loneliness for older adults, but we needed some more foundational research. And so we were able to sort of transmit that information, be transparent about that need. And then my office was able to work with researchers who really were focused on that, were experts in that area. And they worked on a great product for us that then could be foundational for us improving our programs. And it was effective and it was efficient because these are researchers that were already well steeped in that knowledge. And so working together, we could do more than what we could have done independently.
Well, it's tough really to follow that answer, Susan. That was amazing. Thank you. And thank you for your service. So, hi, everyone. I'm Daniel Schumann, and so I come at this from a slightly different perspective. I have worked in government, but I've largely been on the civil society side. And I come at this from the perspective of everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but not to their own facts. And the Evidence Act is foundational for being able to bring that adage to life, right? During my career, I worked to help pass part of that bill, right? The Open Government Data Act, which is about maintaining the availability of authoritative, official, complete data sets that the government maintains for availability to the public, but also for availability to folks inside the executive branch and across the branches, the legislative branch. Because this government information needs to be readily available to all of us, for government, for businesses, for civil society, and for the public. And for me, there's an ideological component, which is that this is part of a broader movement to democratize information, right? That this is information for all of us. We all need to be able to use it. And just since the question was about background, like for me, I've been involved with efforts to make government information publicly available and useful for quite a long time. As Nick alluded to, sometimes this is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes it's 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I'm really not going to try to choreograph this, but there's a lot of stepping that's going on. For me, like I was involved with efforts to make legislative data available, all the information around what is now Congress.gov. I helped write the Data Act way back in the day, push for the availability of federal spending information, congressional budget justifications, we had the Open Government Initiative, the Open Government Directive, and then it's the Open Government Partnership. And I think there's another acronym there that I'm forgetting. And you're looking at the first, last, and only chair of the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee. So I guess I should thank myself for my 3 weeks of service, well, 2 months of service in that role. But it's because I believe that this information is essential and necessary for all of us, right? It's a boon for business, but more importantly, consistent, reliable, accessible, trustworthy, detailed information about what our government does is good for our democracy. It needs to be available online, and what the Data Foundation is doing and making it possible to understand the framework, to understand the plans, to find all the pieces. This is how accountability works, right? This is for the people on the inside to find their directives and direction and implementation and their milestones. For those of us on the outside, to help cheerlead and encourage and prod and to measure. And evidence is about measurement, right? It's what we have and what we want to do and whether we're on the pathway to get there. And this new hub lets us go in that direction. And I'll just finally say, because there's a couple of comments in the chat, for folks who are at federal agencies, you may be having trouble getting the URL redirect to work right now. That is a cybersecurity measure that the federal government generally doesn't like. Redirects that are fairly new, but if you go to the Data Foundation's website, you can easily find the Evidence Act hub there. So like, trust me, actually don't trust me, check it out for yourself. Thank you.
Daniel and Susan, I'm glad you drew the distinction that you come from two very different backgrounds. And so I'm going to toss this question to Nick first. So we've envisioned the hub as having a diverse set of users, but you kind of hinted in your opening remarks. What is the value added for our users? What can we keep them driving back and back? And I'm going to throw that to Nick first, and then Daniel and Susan, if you want to add as well, coming from very diverse perspectives.
So I'm going to describe myself actually as a user first. So we are advocates for effective implementation of the Evidence Act. And just the simple amount of time that we spend looking for the things that are scattered around agency websites as one of the leading advocates of effective implementation is remarkable. So I'd say one of the primary things that we hope it achieves is actually just efficiency for those of us that care about this topic. The fact that government hadn't done this is somewhat remarkable in and of itself. Now, having said that, those of us that work in government shouldn't be that surprised. Now, I think one of the realities is it's hard to get a landscape view of some of these things because we treat government agencies as unicorns all by themselves. You work on agriculture, you work on Veterans Affairs, you work on Health and Human Services. But the reality of how government services are actually delivered is that they're cross-cutting. If you care about a topic like chronic absenteeism, or actually if you care about veterans, many agencies serve those topics. So what we're hoping is that by putting these resources in one place, that others can also help us begin looking across these assets to see where agencies are putting things related to open data across multiple topics or multiple agencies that might be working on things but not collaborating in the way that we hope or want, or where there are policy questions that have some synergies. We have not started doing all of the analytics to enable that. So from a research community or an evaluation community perspective, there are huge potential gains in being able to better understand this body of planning documentation that's emerging. And that also helps us from an industry perspective and understanding where there are opportunities to maybe leverage better knowledge and skills or cooperation across agencies. So the opportunities here are great. And I mean, I can get into a huge strand around advocacy as well. Not to say that those on the outside of government need to help government coordinate itself, but sometimes we can help communicate where the priorities are, or in some cases, maybe should be. So that's maybe just a starting point for your question.
Susan or Daniel?
I'm happy to jump in a little bit. I think that the hub is a great idea because I used to use evaluation.gov on a regular basis when I was the evaluation officer for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And with reorganizations in the government, the focus of the staff that support evaluation.gov has changed. And so this hub can really step in and do a lot of what evaluation.gov was envisioned to do. And so bringing everything together in one place, having that analysis, looking for trends, everything that Nick said is really important. And It's a great way for industry to look and see what are the priorities, what's happening, know what language is being used. Think about putting together a proposal for a contract or a grant, and you're talking about the evaluation focus of it, because that's my area. You want to use the same language that the government uses. Well, what language is that? Come to the hub. The OMV definitions are right there for you, and so there are a lot of different ways that this can be used, but having that centralized place is really, really important.
Yeah, I feel like I'm echoing what was already said, but I'll do it anyway, right? It is routine for there to be challenges in finding the aggregation of information, right? Like the government routinely tries to solve this problem. We have govinfo.gov, right, which has billions of records about the federal government, right? And it's a great resource, right? For IG reports, there's oversight.gov, which pulls in the IG reports from 83 IGs. There's the Access to Congressionally Mandated Reports Act website, which is intended to have all reports from agencies to Congress in one place. There is often a finding and synthesis problem. And it is not, it's because there is no one, generally speaking, whose job it is to look across the different verticals, right? People think about things in the way that government has been built over time. It's this agency or that agency. It's not the way that we're trying to solve or address a problem, or there's a new problem, there's a new cross-cutting approach that's necessary. When I worked at the Sunlight Foundation, my then boss, John Wunderlich, taught me something which has been valuable throughout my career, which was that if you spend just a little bit of time organizing that information and you make it available to other folks, that is an accelerant, right? It's a catalyst for understanding, right? And just a little bit of time makes things incredibly useful for everyone else. And just a final anecdote, the impetus behind the Congressional Budget Justification Transparency Act website was I was talking with an agency budget officer, not a senior person, but someone who worked there. And she said, I change agencies every so often and we can't find our historical records. We can't find these old things. And when I was working to help set up the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee, we were trying to look at the government's open government plans for the last 5 iterations and public comments. And they weren't really findable, right? Over the mists of time, the internet, it becomes challenging to find things. So the fact that the Data Foundation has put this all in one place means that for all of us from now and also, our future selves, 10 years from now, when we're trying to understand what happened, this is the way that we'll be able to do it. So it is an incredible organizing effort that will make all of our lives a lot easier.
And if I could say one other thing, as we think about evidence in particular, data and other forms of evidence is built on evidence. If you lose the past, you really lose the future of your evidence as well.
I agree, Susan. While the team was developing this, we wanted to make sure that we captured those core documents of the Evidence Act, which everyone's spoken to. Something I want to ask you specifically, Susan, from your former experience is we know so much has changed since those almost, Nick, 7 years ago, since this was passed. So to you, what's in there, what would be some very valuable things for us to consider adding in the future that is related to the Evidence Act work that would be important to these users?
Mm-hmm. So in addition to the evaluation plans, for example, which under the first round of evaluation plans with the first learning agendas, which went from about 2022, 2023 through 2026, new learning agendas are due out in February of 2026 with the next budget. But there have been changes in the focus of the agencies and changes in the instructions related to what evaluations are going to be put into those evaluation plans. But even under the broadest sense of those evaluation plans, they only covered the most significant, as defined by the agency, evaluation priorities. There were always additional evaluations that were put in there. And so getting information about other evaluations, tracking other evaluations is really important. And that's something that can go into the hub. Another area is there were some cross-cutting learning agendas. So not agency specific learning agendas, but related to large funding acts and other topical areas that were cross-cutting across the agencies. And so tracking and following up with some of those areas as well, I think is really important.
Susan. Daniel, I'm going to throw it over to you. So, with your experience in government transparency and advocacy, what does a resource like the Evidence Act Hub provide opportunities for the advocates, policy professionals, and those working to communicate the value of good data and evidence? I think you touched on this briefly, but if you could dig into that a little more.
Well, sure, glad to. So, in part, government behavior response to incentives, right? And this is from an external perspective. Internally, let's do it from an internal perspective, right? There's the stakeholders who want to do things. Having a thing that aggregates and tracks things makes it easier to talk to your boss and your colleagues. From the outside perspective, is that government often responds to incentives. And just by tracking and organizing data about what the government does, you encourage some behaviors and you discourage others. Justice Brandeis famously said that sunlight is the best disinfectant. I would add maybe that synthesis is the best antiseptic. It's not easy to say it, but our ability to see and track and understand what policies the government intends to address, where they draw their data from, how they transform the insights gained into policy making, is essential to understanding who's doing it well and who's not, right? Who is still on that path. And when we can have data about the data, we can become better actors that encourage the government when it does well and prod the government for when it should do better. And that is, for me, the value of this. It's looking at the gestalt to understand where people are. So for the best to continue to lead, and for those that are not, to close the gap.
Daniel. And then Nick, I'm going to have you wrap up this question. So as CEO of the Data Foundation and also someone that lives in the world of the Evidence Act, what is most important for you to see in there in the future? And I'm not just asking this selfishly for future plans.
Yeah, I'm actually just picturing myself living in a little house of the Evidence Act, as you say. I live in the world of the Evidence Act. So look, there's so much that we could include in a resource like this, and it's interesting that we had to rely, the team, and you know this because you did it, had to rely on resources from the Internet Archive to build part of the capabilities that are here today. So I think it's worth noting just at the outset here that it's important for some of these resources to live outside government, as I said in the opening, to withstand any transition regardless of who it is. Priorities will always change as a transition from one administration to another happens. And that can even be when it's the same president. And what we want to always ensure, notwithstanding all of the government document retention policies, is that from a research purpose or an evaluative purpose, we have easy, ready access to understand what's changing when we're talking about open data and evaluation activities. Now, the question to the community is, what is really useful in answering those evaluation questions going forward? So right now, there's a lot of planning documents here. There's the statutory and guidance documents. There could be other assets that are here. And I see there's some questions coming in from the audience, for example, about open data availability or things that might exist in resources like data.gov. And those are conversations that we can have about other aspects of infrastructure, including that there are places already in government that have open data repositories, for example. We had not imagined that this resource would be a duplication of something like data.gov. But I think it's an interesting question about what else? Daniel, you mentioned the Congressional Budget Justification Transparency Act. We include lots of performance information that's required by the Government Performance and Results Act, or GPRA, in the CBJ repository. OMB sometimes has its apportionment database, depending on what month it is. And I think there are lots of other resources that clearly link to evaluative questions and things that are related to the Evidence Act. So my appeal is, rather than trying to say, this is what I think should be in the database, would love to hear from the broader community about what do you think is actually useful here? And what would you use in order for us to consider what is the most valuable to the user community?
Let's look forward looking into 2026. So, Daniel, I'm going to throw this question over to you. We've chatted extensively about open data plans and the content and that they're coming out, but going into 2026, can you tell us what the importance of the first wave of open data plans are and what you would like to see in the future around that?
Yeah, godly. So one, like, thank you for helping to track them because that makes my life a lot easier. So looking at the hub today, it looks like there were 23 agencies identified on the website for which open government data plans were expected. And there were, as of to date, 9 plans have been released. That ain't great, right? And I haven't read the plans that are out. I won't pretend that I have. If the Open Government Federal Advisory Committee still existed, this would probably be something that we would look at. And what I would look at in part is like, were these plans co-created with civil society, right? Was there intake in terms of the information that people asked for and this is being provided? Does it reflect input from public partners, whether businesses or academics or the public? Is this merely a codification of what's already being done? Or does it reflect new and or expanded efforts? This is, to say the least, a challenging time for open and accountable government. And the website, what we're seeing here gives us an opportunity to evaluate in part how seriously the various agencies are taking these efforts. Some of the agencies I know in the past have taken this incredibly seriously. And there's a federal advisory committee that I can think of that exists, and some meetings that exist that are a consequence of agency taking their commitment seriously. But there's also a lot of folks who just sort of slid on by or didn't do anything. Maybe this isn't the place to call folks out at the moment, but like I think it provides an opportunity to do that when the time is right. So hopefully that answers your question.
So I want to jump in on open data plans too. And Daniel, no judgment on not reading all of them. But I would say the fact that there are only 9 is a problem. The fact that there are 9 is also something to applaud. The chief data officers that released and published those 9, I think, are the leading indicators of where we see success in open data in the federal government. I'll give a shout out to the Department of Transportation. Dan Morgan, the CDO at Transportation, is the longest serving CDO in the federal government with over a decade of service in the role before it was required. They have a very short open data plan. And it's maybe just an observation that these don't have to be long strategy documents that are 1,000 pages of things that nobody reads. But what they need to be is a clear articulation of what is the priority for open data in an agency, and for the user community to get some feedback. And this should be an iterative process where the user community has a voice at the table to say, these are the things that matter to us. Continue having a priority of these open data assets, or what are the things that we should be making open that we are not. This year, in 2025, back in January, the federal government, OMB, published the Open Government Data Act guidance, which has some expectations for implementation with deadlines by September of 2026. We must see those open data plans across agencies over the next year. So I think for everybody in the user community that's looking at that tab right now and saying, gosh, why aren't there more plans here? I think you should call the agencies right now that don't have those plans. And yes, there are some capacity gaps. And yes, people were out of government or on furlough for a while during the government shutdown. So just heads up. But we should see those plans and we should call for agencies to have those plans because they're really important. So we have a lot of work to do here, but hopefully we'll see those in coming months.
Can I add one more thing? Just because I really want to. So it's the 23 agencies on there are great. I would add OMB, which is not listed on the 23 agencies. I had a series of very uncomfortable meetings with them during the Obama administration about why they weren't putting out open government plans, and eventually prodded them to put out one that was not great, but it existed. So like as OMB is directing agencies to do this, we know that there are data sets that OMB has that should be publicly available, some of which are required by law, for example. I won't name any appropriations, publicly. But I think that they should talk about making, since they set a lot of these policies, they should talk about making their data sets more seriously available to everyone, and they should have a plan as well. I hope, Nick, I'm not soapboxing in a way that's inappropriate for this, but like, it's something I feel strongly about.
As a former OMB staffer, I'll back you up on this one.
Susan, similar question to you about the evaluation plans and learning agendas. You had flagged that a new round is due in 2026. From your previous role, what are some things that we should be looking for and advocating with our partners?
So I will echo what Daniel has said, although I believe there are 10 2026 evaluation plans that have been published to date, but that also then leaves for the remaining 23 agencies a need for those evaluation plans for 2026 to be published. So that's the same issue that was just talked about. In looking at the 10 that are out there, something that really struck me as different from the previous plans, one, they are much shorter. As I mentioned, the instructions that went for the development of these plans really constricted the number of evaluations that could be included in them. So that's something to look for. You can look at previous evaluation plans and previous things that are on agency websites that were not in their evaluation plans, multi-year evaluations that in theory are still being conducted because maybe they end in 2030, 2029, 2027. And so even if they're not in the evaluation plan, they may still be being conducted, and we should follow those and ask for those reports and those data and, of the areas that we're interested in. But in looking at those 10 plans, I also noticed that they seem to focus much more than previous year's plans across the agencies on efficiency and government service procedures and processes. And so that was very interesting to me as well. And really a focus, they do highlight what is important to this current administration, as evaluation plans and agency missions typically do. But there really seems to be much more of a focus on looking at, are the grant programs working as intended, other types of efficiency efforts. And so I think that's something for folks to look at and to be interested in and see how things are different, and then still look for those reports in the timelines that are outlined in those evaluation plans. So there's still a lot of work to be done, a lot to look for, but also continuing to talk to the agency partners, to work with them, to ask them, well, where are your evaluation plans? What happened to the other evaluations that you listed in your 25 or 24 plan that are in theory still being conducted? But yeah, there's a lot of interesting work, and I'll be very interested to see the remaining plans as they are published.
Before we start looking more forward-looking, this is for the whole panel. Is there any other milestones or upcoming items in 2026 that we know of that we would like to make the evidence community with us today aware of, or for consideration in inclusion in the hub?
Something that I've been very interested in, I think I've spoken with you a bit, Sarah, about this, is the changes to the scientific integrity policies. Scientific integrity is central to really implementing the Evidence Act fully, and evaluation science is named explicitly as being covered by those scientific integrity policies. And so there have been changes to those recently. Looking at those and tracking some of those things, I think, would be really an excellent thing to do moving forward.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a great answer to that question. One would be the equivalent, and this may already be, and I have missed it, but like a change log with respect to data sets, right? If there has been we know that there are 8,000 web pages and 3,000 data sets taken off of data.gov, at least earlier this year, although some of them may have come back or changed or something. So like understanding where information goes, how it's being recategorized, if it's being recategorized, like having a sense of version control in some respects as well. Like that, I think that is a useful thing. I think that may be hard for the hub to be able to handle, right? That may be a project that is out of scope, but it may be a policy that agencies should adopt, and tracking whether they're how they're managing data as a strategic asset, as the famous OMB memo says. I think that would be relevant. I think also looking at the bill text and report language from the appropriations bills and the NDAA with respect to the obligations that flow onto the agencies for how they manage their information. I know that there's been a change in the administration's posture with respect to the way that reviews report language from Congress, but it is a very strong demand signal for what the people who write the laws care about. And helping to connect those pieces, I think that would be a very difficult task. But there may be parts of it that might be worthwhile.
I think those are great suggestions. I have two things that I might suggest, which is a bit ironic because I also work with the team on a daily basis. But I think that obviously the emergence of artificial intelligence is something that we're going to have to think about where it integrates here a little bit better, including because agencies are so actively planning with the new Genesis executive order that came from the administration recently with some very rapid deliverables, but with explicit and direct implications for research data. That's going to have some intersection with the requirements under the Evidence Act, specifically with statistical data products and evaluation products. So I think that'll be something that we'll explore. I'd also highlight, and I know there's some questions coming in from the audience that relate to this, about the implications for sub-agencies or operating divisions and bureaus. Well, the resource currently focuses on the agencies that are required under the Evidence Act, under the legal authority, what the reporting requirements were. Under the guidance documents that came out of the Office of Management and Budget, there are lots of other units that are encouraged to undertake these activities. So, for example, the evaluation guidance from the Office of Management and Budget encourages the entirety of government to have an evaluation function. It actually describes that evaluation is a core function of government, not just a high-level expectation at the department level. So that is something that I think we'll be exploring about how to integrate, whether it is a bureau or an operating division of different departments. And so there are probably other things like that that we would want to be taking a closer look at.
So another thing that's similar to that is there was also a suggestion, but not requirement, for agencies to revisit their plans at regular intervals. And so I can speak for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Every year we did a capacity assessment update or check-in, and we published those. And so looking just at what was on evaluation.gov, we had the 4-year plan, but we published on the HHS website previously those updates. And so I think other agencies did some of that as well, updates to their learning agendas, updates to other things like that. So looking for some of those mid-year, if you will, or mid-cycle updates would be important as well.
Okay, last question, then we'll see if we can pick and choose some audience questions. So in a sentence or two, can you all let me know, if someone leaves this webinar and visits the hub, what's the one hope that you have for them and what they're going to do with it? And what is your definition of success for using this resource? And I will start with Susan.
I always want people to ask, so what? That's, one of my favorite questions. And so looking at the Evidence Hub and looking at what folks are doing, and so whoever is looking at it, if you are an academic researcher, if you're in a think tank, if you're in a foundation, if you're in the government service, and thank you for your continued service, looking for those connections. And, as Nick mentioned, people that serve veterans, it's not just the Veterans Administration. There are many agencies that serve veterans, or people that are working on hunger, for example. It's not just one agency, but looking for those synergies, looking for those relationships, and reaching out to folks that are working on them. And so if you're in the government, reaching out to other researchers outside of the government, or your government compatriots in other agencies. And if you're outside of government, reaching out to your government compadres, if you will, and talking to them about what you're working on and how this might be helpful to them and how there might be room to work together. And so I think just really looking closely at all the materials that are there, suggesting new materials, reaching out to the team because there may be new materials that they're not aware of, and really having those conversations. That I think would be the best area of success, having more conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think my standard here would be is more even more basic, which is how much time does it save people in trying to find this stuff, right? You know, you Google for it, you don't always find it like that. That there is this place that you go, and here is the material from our agency, or if your boss or colleague says, "Well, we're doing it this way, but how is this other place doing it?" And you can find it, right? I mean, that's really a low bar, but that's a lot of work for people. So I think that is a useful starting point. I also think, sort of in the inverse, we were talking a little bit before about AI. Have I forget the name of the format now. Someone's going to have to help me. But there's new formats that where data can be, just as you can have data as an API and data in bulk, you can have data that's in a form that AI is capable of ingesting, that is sort of agnostic as to what the platform is. Allowing for transformative uses. What are the best practices across these 20 agencies based upon the plans that are available, and spit them out based on like there becomes a level of synthesis that becomes possible, that it's not just driven by human time. You can leverage technology to help do some of those things. But I think the bottom line is, the goal. Reagan talked about trust but verify. Like, this is how you verify. This is how you know. And if we can make it easier for someone in their office to say, this is how someone else did this, or hey boss, we should do this, and other people are doing it too. Like, all of those things would be our wins that arise from the creation of the site. And those are all things I would hope to see it would catalyze.
Yeah, I think I might just add and reprise what I said at the top, which is my hope is that, maybe even echoing what Daniel just said, is that it's a place for easier, more efficient access to some of the things that we know people are already asking for. It is not perfect, and would not want to pretend that this is going to solve everyone's problems, but we, as an advocacy, having an advocacy component of our organization, have sometimes struggled to find some of the resources ourselves. And even if we can make our own work more efficient, we'll consider that a success. But there's so much more work to be done in supporting effective implementation of the Evidence Act. So we do view this as a starting point and not an ending point, and welcome and encourage feedback on how to make this more useful as a tool. Even during our conversation just now, there's lots of comments coming in from the community with fabulous suggestions, many ideas that we have not yet considered, but we'll take back and think about how we might build in additional resources and capabilities in the months ahead. So I want to just encourage people to continue making those suggestions, and let's make this as useful as we can to continue advocating and supporting effective and good implementation of this important law.
Thank you, everyone. With the time left, I just want to walk through some next steps on the hub in general, but also I just want to stop and say thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Susan. We appreciate your time and your support of the Data Foundation and your knowledge you brought today. If any other questions come through, we'll send them to you, maybe put out a blog or something like that. But as for the Evidence Act Hub, what you see today is just our first iteration. We have some plans going on in the background. One of our next steps is going to be a continuation of those capacity reports that Nick mentioned. We had success tracking the open positions for statistical officials, our chief data officers, and evaluation officials. So we're trying to figure out a great way to show that for you all, so you can go to one place to check for those vacancies there as well. But to some of the conversation, we're considering tracking those AI plan implementations and things like that, so adding that. But something I do want to flag is we're open to feedback. I see a lot of comments coming in about maybe something not working, or a missing link or something like that. We would love to hear your feedback on the website. We have an email that is dedicated for this. It's evidencehub@datafoundation.org. But we have big plans for this, and we're really excited, and we can't do it without our community. So thank you for joining us today. With that, I'm going to let you go. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you so much for your time.